Okay, we're back again for another conversation
We are back.
about
Hello.
hello. And we're back to talk about relationships this time
We are.
and how to deal with a relationship that's strained or you feel stuck or that's just not going as well as you'd like.
Yeah.
And so I know we were talking about the fact that for me, this is such a critical part of a life well lived, to just have strong relationships with people that you feel connected and aligned with. And in our personal lives, we get to choose the people that we work with or that we interact with, I should say. But in our professional life, we don't always have that luxury. Right? We don't always have the luxury to choose who our bosses, who our colleagues are. And so being able to kind of go from stuck or in conflict to something productive becomes really important.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think one of the things we agreed on when we were chatting earlier was around this concept of it starts with self. I think we often, at least I have in the past, always looked at difficult relationships or relationships that aren't ideal as with a lens looking at the other person and always thinking they need to change, they're annoying, why are they doing this, they're the cause of this, rather than looking at inwards at what my percentage contribution is to this situation and where I can potentially take charge, take control, do something differently. It sounds obvious kind of talking about it here, but often I don't think we do that. I don't think we look at it through that lens.
No, I know. I don't. I didn't for sure. And I have to remind myself that anything I see is based on the lens I've put forth and not an actual representation of what's going on in its entirety, right? Because for one, there's a ton of assumptions we make when we narrate someone else's story. It's hard enough, I find, to know myself, let alone what's going on with someone else in their life, especially in the professional world where you don't always know or are privy to all of what's going on in their life from a personal perspective, which certainly impacts their work and how they show up at work.
Yeah, I don't even think about that. I mean, I do more now, but if I think back when I was younger, I never ever thought what was going on in someone's life. I never thought about who they were as a person, who, what's their life situation, what they've been through up until now, what's going on in their conditioned mind. We've talked in the past about how we're all a bit conditioned by our circumstances, our traumas, our things, all of that stuff. And yeah, it's interesting to realize when you really realize that we just really don't think about it. We're just so focused inwards, and on ourselves and our own sense of self, which is kind of our ego, isn't it? When something bad happens in a relationship at work, or someone treats us badly, or they talk to us in a way that we don't like, we sort of, our ego kicks in and we want to react, or we want to judge them, or tell our friends about them and kind of make ourselves feel better about it and like bring ourselves up a bit. And it's all the ego, really, isn't it?
It is. And you're reminding me, those movies where they start narrating from one perspective, but then they actually go and narrate from some other perspectives. They've done this in sitcoms and some movies, and the story that's told from the different perspectives is entirely different. And so that's just a reminder to know that whenever we're narrating our story, we're narrating it from one perspective and it's ours, not anybody else's perspective, right? One of the things I do with clients almost every time when they're in stuck relationship is to take their own narration, but then to actually have them physically stand in someone else's kind of land, to designate a part of the room as their world, and then to really get curious about what's going on there. It's always interesting what comes up in those exercises.
No, it really does. And I mean, to people that haven't done that, that might seem a bit, I don't know, weird or crazy, but those kind of things really, really work. It's just changing perspective, getting into a different zone. Because I do think we just live in our heads all the time. We've talked about this on many calls before. Like most of the time, we're just living in our heads, listening to the chatter. And if we don't slow down, we'll get lost and kind of washed away with all that chatter, and we won't have any sense of charge. And that's why I honestly believe, particularly again when I was younger, I used to feel stressed, anxious, frustrated with people, frustrated with bosses, with co-workers, because I was sort of lost in the thought about the situation. I didn't really have that sense of conscious charge and the ability to sort of pause, take stock, and like you said, think about some of these things, like the assumptions I'm making, and think about like how I'm just really trying to make myself feel better by having a bitch here, and I'm not really helping the situation, or doing anything creative. It's so easy to complain, right?
It is, yeah. And there's a connection that happens between you and the person you're complaining with, if it's not the actual person you're complaining about. But it's a false sense of connection, I find. And it's not constructive. And we can easily engage very much in the stories that we tell ourselves without that kind of conscious pause to say, okay, what part of this is actually fact, could be submitted as evidence in a court of law versus the story I'm telling. And often much of what we say to ourselves goes in the story column and not in the fact column.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful about the temporary fulfillment you get when you're sort of complaining or bitching or blaming or all of that stuff, because I know when I used to do that, it never really made you happy long term. It always leaves a bit of a frustration and an overarching sense of just I don't know, like just a bitter taste in your mouth, And I think this is the trick, really. It's like it's kind of keeping your ego in check and not getting swept away, and sometimes your brain will try and tell you, oh, but you can't give in to this or allow these people to get away. So it's like it's trying to trick you into kind of just going with the flow. But actually, if you can kind of avoid that and really try and make those more conscious choices, look at things differently, and I'm really interested to hear how we both do that. But if we can start to do that, and both for ourselves, like keeping our own ego in check, but also almost applying that concept to others. When you look at someone else, having compassion and going, oh, this person who might be acting crazy, being nasty, whatever, they're in their own ego. They're lost, they're conditioned, or they are, they're just a bit, they're not conscious in their behavior because we're all in the same boat. We're all getting washed away by our assumptions and judgments and frustrations and pain. Sometimes all of that stuff's going on.
Yeah.
So I do think, and I'm narrowing a bit here on the whole ego concept, but I think for me, that's a bit of a core of it.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing you say is, don't believe our stories. Watch out for assumptions we're making about other people. Know that much of our story is about our connection with ego and our trying to make ourselves feel good about something, but it's really not a constructive way of doing it. And that much of that is also conditioning, right? Much of it is a way that we've patterned in as a way to deal with this stuff, but that there is another way to do that. I always, there's a couple of people, not many, that are just really kind of difficult people sometimes to deal with. They're just abrupt, and I always, when I come across someone who is has very strong conditioning or very kind of, I always find for me to kind of connect back with their 3-year-old selves, like in my mind, to remind myself that when they were 2 or 3, they didn't have this, that they didn't start off this way, not as a way to make, because I have my own conditioning, we all do, but as a way to realize that is ego and not who they truly are. And that may seem a little, I don't know, woo-woo, but really, when we think about how we start off and how we evolve, the difference between one and the other is the conditioning that happens and how our biology evolves through time and our neurology, right? So it's a good reminder for me personally.
Yeah, no, I've used that sort of experiment as well, because again, I do think that's the core of it. Like these people that are acting in that way, it's conditioned. Whether you call it ego or conditioning, to me they're quite similar. It's just a false sense of who you are and how you need to be to
Yeah.
exist in the world. That's how I sort of think of the ego. So when people are acting like that continuously in that dramatic, so overly assertive, mean way, sometimes like you say, that's not really who they are as a being, as a human being. Even it's like, but it is who they are as a conditioned way of being, possibly to avoid something that was happening in the past. You know, we don't know ever what's gone on with people in the past, but normally for all of us, there's some kind of conditioning that leads us to be people pleasers, or the opposite, you know, someone that's closed and doesn't want to please people, you know, because there's some fear going on. So therefore they just go through the day functioning to get things done without any risk of any actual proper connection.
Yeah.
You know, and there's probably another 20 types of faces all of the ego and the conditioning that show up, but we don't think about that most of the time. When we're in an interaction, we're just seeing someone in the way they're being and we get pissed off, right, like we said earlier. But when you start to have this, as we're having this conversation, I'm even thinking now, even people that I work with day to day right now, I'm thinking, yeah, even I forget to do this, you know, because, you know, at the heart of it, we're all probably really decent people, you know.
Yeah, and we're reacting to some kind of thought that's come up for us around what's happening, right? So it's their ego, but it's our ego too, right? If something bothers us, it's our ego as well that's kind of reacting to whatever it is that's happening, and then that has a thought, and then, you know, we're engaging in that thought, and that has us start complaining and having whatever.
It's like fuel on a flame, isn't it? So it starts somewhere, like a little, you know, the burn, the fire, and then we throw the fuel on and make it bigger by reacting to them directly, or bitching about it, or we make the whole thing bigger and more messy. You know, so I think when we think of it like that, it's kind of like, well, how do we not throw the fuel on the flame? How do we moderate the flame? What have we got in ourselves that can do something differently? Which comes back to what we were saying earlier about how we can take charge.
Yeah. So how do we do that? How have you done that? What are some techniques that you use?
Okay, for me, well, for me, it's about belief systems and I always say I write down things for myself, little things to remember, because it's a condition, and, you know, to act differently in these scenarios, you have to sort of practice. You know, so for me, I've practiced for a long time a general belief that I can get on with anyone. So I've always said this. Anybody that knows me, has worked with me, probably knows me saying I will find a way to get on with anyone. And it's not because I'm a people pleaser or I'm a super nice person. It's just that I believe that if I have that as an intention, then I will sort of find a way. So that's kind of the underlying thing. And then in the actual situations, I always say to myself and to others, like, stick to facts always, because I remember in a book once, there was a saying, don't get dramatic in the midst of the drama, which is similar to what we're saying about throwing the fuel on. So it's like, see the drama come up. And whenever I see a drama or someone shouting, I used to work in a big corporate bank, and there would be certain people in that environment that would sort of shout or be overly dominant and just completely over the top. And as soon as I felt that happening or saw it, it's like, it was like a signal to me to go, okay, here we go. The drama is occurring or the flame is starting to rise. And it would just be a signal for me to, I would almost hear that signal and sort of just go, right, be the calmest person in the room here. Just elevate yourself into kind of calmness and stick to facts. I always say stick to facts, because the drama is the drama, the noise, the loudness, all that, but the facts are the facts. So whatever's coming at you, I always think, okay, what are the facts? If someone's asking you to do something, is it factually my job? Can I factually do it?
Yeah.
Is it factually true? Those things allow you to respond with information, you know. But if I just focus on facts and not drama, it's almost like it going over you, you know. It's all about a mindset and noticing at the very start when it's happening. Like I said, as soon as you feel it or see the noise, the drama, just noticing and get into a different state.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So the cue of someone bringing drama, or the event of someone bringing drama, was a cue for you to calm down. And that it sounds like took some time to train yourself to do that.
100%. Yeah. I mean, God, if I went back 20 years ago, I was the complete opposite. I used to be the first one complaining, bitching, and reacting. Even to managers, my ego would kick in and I'd be sarcastic, you know, responses. and it didn't get me anywhere, never gets you anywhere. So it's only over time building the muscle and knowing what you really want at the end of it, which is peace, calm. You know, we all just want to feel better. And I know for a fact that since I started doing some of these things, it just changed my whole experience. Nothing was hard. Like the work day was not hard. There's nothing anyone could do to sort of to shift your state of being or your just state of mind. You know, and it sounds probably difficult. You know, I imagine it must be difficult for anybody that hasn't done that yet, but it really is possible because I know it, because I was the complete opposite, and it works, and you feel better. And again, it's not about, oh, but you're letting them get away with being this or that. Because at the end of the day, if they were completely over the top or violent or something crazy, that you would do something right. We're talking about people that are just annoying and rude or whatever, and difficult to be around. And in those other cases, you know, you could take action, but I'm talking about when it's just, you know, it's just the usual stuff that we don't like, and how to be around these situations. And yeah, as we said at the beginning, just pick how you want to respond, pick who you want to be in this scenario, and enjoy the process of actually letting it all unfold without taking it personally.
Yeah. I love what you're saying, because it does put the responsibility on ourselves to change our state, right? Which is different than typically when you're having an issue with someone. We're focusing the light on the things that are happening that we don't like. And this is kind of refocusing that light on the things that we have control and responsibility over, which is, what can I do in myself to either change something, change my own state, change the environment. Like, one of the things that comes up for me, and I know that you and I believe that in a relationship, it always starts with us, right? Like, we can't go into trying to improve a relationship hoping the other person's going to change the dance, right? We actually have to change the dance or the song that's playing, right? We have to do it.
Exactly.
And I know that in my own examples, for example, when I've been gone through a difficult time in my marriage, for example, where I don't think not as loving as I want or whatever, the thing that has changed how I looked at it at the beginning of my marriage versus 18 years in is that if I feel that something's not there, I give it. I introduce that into the relationship, because what I have found almost every single time is that the minute that I bring it in, it is met with that or greater. And every time I waited or bitched about not getting it, it didn't change much, right? Like, if I was waiting for someone else to bring it, well, number one, I'm putting the responsibility and the power in someone else's hand. And number two, my energy wasn't one where it would be inviting for that person to bring that into the relationship. So I know for me, one big lesson was, and it's similar to what you're saying in terms of choosing your state, is bring into the relationship what you want to get out of it, like by choice and consciously and intentionally, and see what shows up from there, not with the expectation, but as a way of, if you bring it in, then you're creating that for yourself. If I'm just more loving, well, then that's the lens that I'm operating under. I can't help but feel more loving, right?
Yeah.
Just even within myself, because that's where I am. Whereas if I'm frustrated and angry, well, that's the lens, that's the state I'm coming from. So of course, that's more of what I'm going to be feeling. So that little switch for me, both the bring in what I want, and then to know that by bringing it in, I'm creating it for myself, changed so much.
Yeah, I completely get what you're saying. And as you were talking, I'm thinking of it almost like as planting little seeds. It's like sometimes you might plant something and you see the benefit right away. You show love, you show something like, I don't know, giving, and it will come back. Other times you'll plant a few seeds, you still don't get it. You plant a few seeds, you still don't get it, but it will come. And I think this is what it's all about. It's like, don't wait for someone else to sort of improve things or give you what you want, like create what you want. by initiating and putting it out there, be the change you want to see in the world, as they say, all of that stuff. And they say it because it is true. It does work. What you put out in energy will come back in energy at some point. Just we've got to trust in it and get over ourselves, get over our resistance to go, well, why should I have to be the one? Why are they not doing it? They're my parent. They should be doing this for me. Or they're my boss. They should be setting up this meeting with me as my boss. Well, no, take responsibility and do it yourself and show your boss who you are. It's a different perspective, but it's a much more liberating perspective, I think.
Well, whenever we're in choice and we're able to kind of take action, I find we open up just naturally, right? Because we're seeing some progress, whereas when we're stuck on what other people are doing that's upsetting us or that we don't like, then that's where our state of mind is. It's really hard to be creative, really hard to be to bring a creativity to something when you're in that state of mind. And I also think, even if that other person doesn't give it to you, like let's say you're putting in all this stuff. Number one, don't look for it to come. Just know that by bringing it in, you're creating it. But then number two, you're in a state of mind to make an intentional decision on how to move forward, rather than this vicious cycle of complaint, which is easy to get lost in for years sometimes, rather than going, okay, well, what do I have ownership over? How can I change this for myself, and what decision needs to be made? But you need a bit more openness and slowing down for that kind of process to happen.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like basically going, what do I want from this, whether it's your personal relationship or your boss or your colleague that you're working closely with? What do I want out of it? Okay, I want that. If it's my responsibility to create it, what do I do? What do I do? Be creative, find ways. Even if you don't think they are, you should have to do it. Again, that's ego talking. It shouldn't be this way, or I shouldn't have to. Get rid of all that, because it probably doesn't work for you, or hasn't up till now. Change to the whole creative, well, it doesn't matter what should be. This is what I'm going to be and what I'm going to create. And it's actually kind of addictive in a way, because you realize, God, I can change so much stuff and create so much stuff when I just get over myself, and get over all the stories and the voice that's telling you, or that's trying to convince us otherwise. Like, get rid of it and connect back more to the sort of heart energy, the creative energy, the loving energy. As cliche as that might sound, it's true. That's where the creativity comes.
Well, and Byron Katie always says, why fight with what is? It is. Right? Like, why fight with what is? It just is. So accept it so that we can move on, is kind of the idea. And moving on doesn't mean to endure it, to struggle through it. It really just means to be creative and to intentionally decide how you want to improve things for yourself. And there's all sorts of strategies or things that you can do. But first, you kind of have to let go of fighting with what is. It just is. So
exactly. See it for what it is, and just just do something about it. It's kind of weird because it's simple when we're talking about it, and I think, okay, so why is everyone not doing that? So I'm just sort of wondering what keeps people. What is the benefit of not taking that responsibility? So I'm just trying to think, like, okay, what are the almost the imaginary benefits of it? What do we tell us are the benefits?
Well, I think there's a false sense of progress when we're complaining about it. Like, I think part of it might be that. I think we're just so engaged in our story that we can get stuck there. But I think talking about it, complaining about it, gives us a false sense of progress. It's not really progress, but it gives us a sense that we're doing something about it because we're talking about it, but we're not constructively talking about it, and we can get stuck there often. I also think that people don't learn how to do this constructively. I think we're not taught not to believe every thought that we have, and to actually be able to separate ourselves from this thought process that tends to be just a patterned habit, versus stepping away from it and just knowing that that's a habit of pattern that we have, and going, okay, well, now what, right? From a more open place. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of the same, really. I guess it's like, to repeat myself, I think it's this voice that we've lived with so long that is trying to keep your ego secure, which is like keep you at a certain level that's just above everyone else. So whatever's going on, whatever you've done or not done, and often we do things wrong and we still can blame others because that sense will kick in of self-preservation, and we'll find the reason to say it was someone else's. So I think it's just that natural part of life, that survival instinct that kicks in and says, I've got to find a way to blame or judge, to put myself a tiny bit higher than everyone else or that person, to give me the false sense that I'm okay, or that, that I'm okay. And again, false sense. So it's temporary joy, I guess you could say, but it never really lasts, because all of those things, I think your body stores up the memory of all these things, in here. And do you feel fulfilled when you're bitching and moaning all day, or complaining and not moving things forward or the relationship forward? Not really, because it's just a cycle, isn't it?
It is. And even when you're talking to the person who you're having a difficult time with, I have found I've kind of trained myself to realize when I'm in the circle where both of us are just simply trying to prove to the other that we're right, or we're trying to justify or explain our intentions or interactions. We almost have to I've trained myself to realize when we're going in circles and just naming it. So it feels like we're going in circles. And look for, what do we agree on? Like, that's typically where I go. It's kind of like, okay, we're naming it. Feels like we're going in circles. I can feel myself really wanting you to understand where I'm coming from, but I'm going to let that go. Like, what do we agree on? Where do we have some alignment? And try to build from there, or just take a break in that moment. Sometimes we're just so heated up that it's better to just say, you know what, no, this isn't being constructive from both of our sides. Let's take a break and come back with clearer minds. Because if what we're trying to do is have someone assume responsibility, that almost never works, because that self-preservation kicks in, as you said, and then you just start going in circles.
Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely agree with that as well. It's it's a weird one, isn't it? Because again, it's kind of simple, but I think for everything we've talked about, I would say the key thing is just to make a choice around, I would say the key thing is to understand that the impact of that ego plays in our life. I think that's, for me, is the fundamental. Like, if someone was to say, okay, so what's the summary, or what's the next step? I honestly believe, at least in my experience, trying to understand a little bit about how that ego plays in your life, how it shows up, what it's doing or pretending to tell you, and versus the actual impact it's having. Because I think that would be such time well spent, energy invested in really understanding that. Because if you get that, you all of a sudden can understand your own ego and other people's, and start to suddenly have this kind of empathy for others. When you see someone that's acting not as you would like to, or doing something wrong or whatever, you just instantly have this empathy, and you can go, okay, when you're coming from empathy, it's so much easier to sort of make different decisions, like you say, around trying to find a common ground, trying to understand where someone's coming from, which I always think the good thing, when someone's, even if they're not talking to you very nicely, or they're being very annoying or whatever, it's just, I always say, like, help me understand what you really want here. Just trying it, because I always think people like to talk, right? They always want to, you say, help me understand. It's always a good entryway into sort of giving them a bit more space and really hearing, and just be the person to find a way to get on with that person in some way.
I probably, there's been a couple of books that I think have been game changers for me in this space. One was The Four Agreements, and the whole idea around our mind is an assumption making machine. So knowing that kind of frees us. And we've done the interesting, sometimes painful exercise of sharing assumptions with people, like, I assume about you, and being brutally honest, but how freeing that could be, and how that can really clear the space for connection. I think that's how you and I actually,
that's how we met.
that we knew each other, we were in this program, and then we did this exercise of clearing assumptions, and then from then on we're like, oh gosh, like there was something there, right? But
Yeah.
until we did that, it was a little more superficial. I think it was kind of like,
Yeah, it's a great exercise. It was a great exercise in challenging the things you make up about someone. It's like, what do you make up about this person? Like, what am I making up about you? Just from the limited time I know you, the small things I've heard you say. And it's amazing when you hear me share those, and I heard you share yours with me. Like, sometimes they can be a bit true, or they can be truth. Other times they can be completely untrue. And it's like, oh my God, I've been walking around and making this up about you, and actually responding differently to you because of that assumption, when there's not literally no truth in it whatsoever.
Yeah. So
Just
that
cool.
just knowing that it's just, really eye-opening. And then one of the other agreements is don't take anything personally, right? Don't take anything personally, because whatever someone says about you is based entirely on the lens they're using, and only they choose that lens, not you. But we tend to have what someone says about us mean something about us, but in fact, it means something about them, not us. So that's like, was really difficult for me to get my mind around, but gosh, how freeing that is when someone comes to me and says something. And, part of me still looks at the 1% truth or the 2% truth. What is there in there for me to learn and to reflect on about myself, for me to grow from? But that's my exercise to do. But really, 80-90% of it is all them, right? It's all based on how they're interpreting, what assumptions they've made up, and what their inner talk or inner dialogue is saying, right? So those two things from that book have been really, really helpful for me.
Yeah, no, I know that. I think the other two, just in case anyone's wondering, is be impeccable with your word and always do your best. I think they're the four, isn't it? So be impeccable with your word, always do your best, don't make assumptions, and don't take anything personally. And that's from the 4 Agreements. That book is really good. I remember a lot of highlighting was going on the first time I read that, which is when I know it's a good one.
It's an amazing book for sure, and an easy read. It's like a small little book. So
yeah, no, it is. And the other one for me, as we always talk about, has got to be the Eckhart Tolle, Power of Now, and A New Earth. Those 2 books. I should be on commission the number of times I've referred those books, but essentially they were a life changer for me in understanding my own mind and how it made me act, versus years later having put some of that into practice. It's just shifted my whole experience of life, which sounds a bit dramatic, but it's actually true. And why when I talk about ego and understanding it, it's so important that we understand it, because we get to have a more fulfilled life when we start to respond differently to our own thoughts, to ourselves and to other people. So I would definitely recommend those books.
Amazing. I think there's a lot to chew on, just on what we've already shared. I think if there's one message to take away, it's where we started, which is, in relationship, it always starts with us. It always starts with you yourself, and to take ownership and responsibility, and then to create something for yourself from that place.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, just even if it feels weird taking responsibility, or you feel like I shouldn't have to, do it anyway. Be vulnerable, whether it's in your personal life or at work, and see the results for themselves.
Okay, I think that's it for this week.
It is. I will see you soon, Lisa, for the next one.
See you soon.